live session. The first Friday of every month, I am bringing on some amazing guests doing incredible work in the world and building their personal brand in ways that I really admire. Love to hear where you are listening or watching from today. So definitely get in the chat, say what's up, let us know where you're in from around the world. Love seeing that. I am your host, Rachel B. Lee, and today my guest is Marisa Hamamoto, who is a LinkedIn top voice around disability advocacy. And we've spent some time together just hearing about her business and what she's doing. And she's really an incredible person that is the perfect guest for October, which is National Disability Awareness Month. She has so much to teach and help us in being more aware and to be better allies and partners in the community. So with that, Marisa, thank you so much for being here. I would love for you to just introduce yourself, talk about your amazing story and how you created the company that you have today, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. You are so I just love the way that you market yourself. And yes, you are a marketing expert, but every time your posts pop up, it's like, wow, this is it's like I feel like I got to know you before we even had a conversation. So, thank you so much for setting the example and also kind of taking a little bit of the discomfort away from social media especially for many of us who are kind of thrown into, oh, we got to create a personal brand and what do I do? So just wanted to say before I dive into my story. So yes, as Rachel mentioned, my name is Marisa, and I am best known for being the founder of Infinite Flow, which is a nonprofit and award-winning dance company that employs disabled and non-disabled dancers with a mission to create a more inclusive world, one dance at a time. In a nutshell, how the heck did I get into this world of disability inclusion? I've been a dancer my whole life, but I also had a stroke when I was a senior in college. That stroke paralyzed me from the neck down temporarily. So today I do not consider myself to have a physical disability. However, this stroke, which paralyzed me from the neck down, really was this moment in my life that changed the way I see things forever. So as I made a comeback to dance and recognized that disabled people didn't have equal access to dance, despite the fact that over 15% of the global population had a disability. I just felt called to do something about this. I am a lifelong dancer. I love to dance. Dance is something that I believe everyone should do, and it's good for you. And I really believe that dance can transform lives, transform each person. And so to see that dance was not equally accessible to one of the biggest minority groups in the world didn't really make sense. So that eventually led me to Infinite Flow. However, just like with many stories where there's just so many layers, just other aspects of me being a disabled person is that I am also a late diagnosed autistic. Autism is something that you're born with. However, I was diagnosed with this just last year in the middle of my life. And so I chose to get diagnosed. I chose to get assessed for neurodiversity from all the work I've been doing with my dance company, Infinite Flow, and learning about neurodiversity. So that was last year. Now, adding to that, recently I was in a car accident where let's just say I survived the car accident. Someone hit me really bad from the back. However, and my car spun a couple times and I could have died, but I survived. I am around a lot of spinal cord injury survivors, a lot of motor vehicle accident survivors. And so here we are, 8 years into building my dance company, and another layer of disability has kind of entered my story, which I am still processing all of that. But I definitely, as someone that's heard so many stories from spinal cord injury survivors about their lives changing in one moment, this was one of those moments where, in one moment, I could have died. In one moment, I could have gotten a brain injury or spinal cord injury. I didn't. I am dealing with some whiplash symptoms as during the recording here. So, anyways, with all that said, I am just so grateful to be here, first of all, and just confirmation that I'm here on this earth as part of my life mission is to create more inclusivity for disabled people.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And
A lot.
living, you are a gift for the world and from the above, right? To educate people and to really bring awareness around so many people have disabilities, so many people have things going on that we're not aware of. And that's something I want to start with because it is, National Disability Awareness Month. And so awareness, right? Can you just there's lots of different, you just discovered you're neurodivergent. Like when we talk about awareness, what are the things that we should be more mindful of to make sure that we're being inclusive, the things that we can see and not see? Can you kind of explain that a little bit so people get what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. The question you asked could be a 4-hour conversation, but I'm just going to speak freely with what kind of comes to mind. So, first, learning about the statistics that 1 in 4 Americans, that is 61 million Americans, have a disability. Globally, over 15% of the global population have some sort of disability. 70 to 80% of disabled people have non-obvious, non-apparent, invisible disabilities. And that's something that I think we all kind of, including myself, I didn't know that either until like maybe a couple years ago, in which, when we think about disability, we think about the wheelchair user, the amputee, the deaf person with a hearing aid, the blind person with the cane. Like, we think about visible disabilities as disabilities, but actually 70 to 80% of disabled people have invisible, non-obvious, non-apparent disabilities. So that's one thing to note. One thing that, disabled or not, we all have access needs. Yes, some people have very obvious access needs, such as a wheelchair user needing an elevator to get to the second floor. Like, there are some obvious accommodations that need to be provided, but we all have access needs. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're more of a morning person. You focus better in the morning than perhaps your primary work that takes the most energy, that takes the most brain space. Maybe that can be done in the morning. Maybe you can ask for morning shift hours, or if you're like a night owl that you just think you just do your best work at 2 a.m. in the morning, is that something that can be accommodated at your workplace? We all have access needs. The need of having a glass of water, next to on your desk so that you don't dehydrate yourself. That's also considered an access need, so that, during a meeting, if you want to take a sip of water, before you go on with your presentation, you're able to do that. So I like to think about, disability inclusion as providing, not just, it's providing spaces and places, for not just disabled people to do better work. It's for all of us to be able to meet our needs and have our needs met so that we can do the best work possible. And the thing with disability inclusion is that it's got a ripple effect. When one person is accommodated, and we realize that that accommodation led to positive results, then that culture can, spread. So, but I like to think about disability inclusion as not just for disabled people, but, again, we all have access needs.
Of course, of course. When you talk about the 70, 80% people have disabilities that are non-visible. What sort of things is this group experiencing? How are we, as an employer, right, as a teammate, how do we know so that we can make sure we're being inclusive? And awareness is the first stage, but maybe somebody doesn't know.
Yeah, okay, that's to speak on that a little bit. So when we some diagnoses when it comes to non-apparent invisible disabilities include neurodiversity, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, chronic illness, deaf, being deaf, hard of hearing, blind. Some of these folks, it's not so obvious. And there's many other I would say diagnoses that fall into the category of non-apparent, non-obvious disabilities. And a lot of these disabilities are oftentimes not diagnosed until, midlife, like myself. Like I was not diagnosed with autism when I was a child, and it was my own choice in very recent times that I decided to go get diagnosed, because for me, what I've learned through doing my work is the diagnosis actually gives you clarity, and that clarity leads to confidence. So for me, in my case, it's like with my autism, a lot of the diagnostic criteria around autism, these were things that I thought were wrong with me. For example, not being able to read social cues, or I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I do, some of this I have learned to laugh at myself, is sometimes I don't get jokes. I don't get jokes. And I'm laughing because a lot of my dancers kind of laugh at me, and I got used to being laughed at, and I take this like kind of lightly too. But as a kid growing up, when you don't get a joke that your friends are all laughing about, or you're watching TV, some kind of like comedy sitcom, and everybody's laughing except for yourself because you don't really get it, it's embarrassing. So
Yeah.
I used to think something was wrong with me. To this day, I occasionally text a friend going, "Can you explain this to me, please?" But there we go. But the interesting thing is, now that with my diagnosis, I know, oh, okay, this is just part of my autism. I'm more comfortable asking people like, "Hey, can you explain that idiom? Can you explain that joke? I'm just not getting it." And I don't feel so embarrassed about that. And the interesting thing is, the people around me are more than happy to explain. And it's just my perception of feeling embarrassed. So what I realized, and what I realized with my autism, is that there is nothing wrong with me. This is just an aspect of me. If we're talking about business and employment, there is so much stigma around disability that disclosing your disability is still very, very challenging. It's still very challenging. I hear this from my clients. I hear this from many people that work in HR, saying, we want to accommodate, but we don't know who needs accommodations. So as leaders, we want to create a space where it's safe for people to disclose their needs. It's up to that person to disclose their disability,
Right.
and to who they disclose it to. Maybe they disclose it to the head of HR, but not to their team. That is up to them. But in terms of being able to go, "Hey, here are my needs," like that needs to be destigmatized. And so part of my work, with Infinite Flow, my dance company, is, we're showing disability inclusion in a very beautiful way. That when disabled people are included, like everyone else, and we work together, beautiful things can be created and made. So, and that's something that I think when someone asked me the question recently, they said, what keeps you going with this work? Because I'm creating something that doesn't exist in some ways, and for me, I just always keep in mind that disability inclusion leads to amazing things. I mean, some of the greatest inventions in the world have been designed for disability. For example, the typewriter was created as a result of a blind woman wanting to write a love letter in her privacy. Like, again, what the heck? You know, a blind woman wanted to write a love letter in her privacy, and her friend said, all right, let me invent something. And that became the first iteration of the typewriter. Email was invented by a deaf engineer wanting to communicate with his deaf wife at a distance. And oh my gosh, email has revolutionized the way that we communicate. So, you know, there's just so many examples historically where disability inclusion has led to amazing innovations and things. And so that's what keeps me going. So, you know, I think within any workplace, we really want to destigmatize the disability by showing the potential of what inclusivity and creating belonging can bring. But one more aspect now, kind of more on the customer facing marketing aspect of disability inclusion. I don't know how to respond to this quite, you know, yet. But one thing I'll say is, as someone who, as a disability leader within Los Angeles and running this dance company, in our general inbox, I get a lot of casting notices for disabled talent. And I would say 90% of the time, they're looking for visibly disabled talent, looking for actors with visible disabilities. And that excludes me, for example, you know, and I mean, if the role or the opportunity is something that's worked for one of my dancers, I will submit them, you know, and of course I do that. But then it's you know, it's also very I would say it gets kind of tiring after a while when you feel like, when you know that 70 to 80% of disabled people, you know, have non-obvious, non-visible disabilities, and yet, you know, when people think about disability representation in the media, they're looking for the visible and the obvious. So we need to change that, you know, too. And I feel like, you know, social media tends to favor, you know, algorithmically favor kind of what we call the favor like visible disabilities versus invisible disabilities within the disability advocacy space, you know, too. So yeah, it's just something to kind of note, that just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. As a dance company director, and also going through my personal evolution of having been diagnosed officially with autism, and having an invisible disability myself, I'm always thinking to myself, so how can we make the invisible visible?
Right.
And one way to do this is through telling stories and storytelling. So that's something that it's just kind of in the back of my mind, going, all right, we're gonna figure this out on how to amplify, you know, all voices versus just one type of voice.
Yeah, I mean, Marissa, so much helpful information, just me listening and understanding. And as you were talking about that example with Hollywood, you know, in social media, what kept coming to me was, you know, personal branding and sharing your voice. And then you said storytelling, and it's 100%, because if we can't see it, then we must tell it in a way that is, you know, comfortable. And whether that's certain designations on social media, however that comes to life, the companies and the individual, right? In some ways, it's kind of it's sucky to put people in a certain position where they must be more forward in what they're experiencing. But in some ways, that is the differentiation, which we talk about with personal branding. That starts to become your voice, not entirely your voice. And there's something beautiful about that, right? It's kind of a push to say, hey, you get to brand yourself and make this part of your story, because otherwise, how are we going to learn? How are we, the masses, going to learn? And you've really taken ownership and responsibility in many ways on behalf of so many others to just say, I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to create something new and lead the way on behalf of many others. And I hope that your influence, I know you are, you're kind of giving permission for others to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think what I'm noticing more and more as I do my work is starting conversations is really, really important. I don't have the answers to everything. I'm a work in progress as much as anyone else. But what I noticed, whether it's online, on LinkedIn, or offline, in some boardroom or meeting or conference or speaking engagement, Q&A, etc., is that we need to start having conversations and being okay with having some of these harder conversations. So, for example, I made a post about inclusive language around disability on LinkedIn, which went viral. I think it got shared, I don't know, 300 times, 400 times, something like that. But I went through like I think 8 or 9 different words that you shouldn't use around disability, such as the word handicap, such as the R word, etc. And there were probably about 200 comments that came into this because not everyone agreed with what I wrote, which is totally okay. It's totally okay. It's totally okay. People obviously needed a space to share. Like, for example, I had a fellow disability advocate say, I don't see anything wrong with the word handicap. Like, and then an argument follows after that. And honestly, it's not having these conversations and ignoring and almost making it seem like the issue doesn't matter. That is the
Yes.
problem. So
Right.
so I am here to kind of I'll just say from a disability advocacy standpoint, yes, I want people, I think we want to keep things positive, and um, instead of just continuously complaining about the problems, we go, here's the possibilities that can come when we really practice inclusivity and we create belonging for everyone. Um, I think it's not necessary to be a disability inclusion expert to practice disability inclusion or inclusion just altogether. I think the questions we want to ask ourselves is, who is left out? What can I do? How can I make a difference? Like, who is left out? And that might not necessarily be someone with a disability, but I think sometimes because we only are in our little bubble and we only know what we know in the moment, that we sometimes forget who we've left out, whether that's at the table, that's at a party, like whatever, whether it's personal, professional. Sometimes like we kind of overlook certain things. So kind of asking yourself, who's left out? Who is not included in this conversation? Like, I think asking yourself that. And then it's like, okay, so how can we include that person? Like, what is it we need to do to invite that person, or make that person feel more welcome in the space? And again, even though again, I knew nothing about accessibility or disability inclusion 8 years ago. I had to learn it as I did it, but my heart was there. I said, okay, dance should be available to everyone. Dance is a universal language that belongs to everyone. These people are not included. How are we going to make that work? And it's just that much of a thought process. I think from if we're talking about workplace, business, having disabled people at the table in your workforce is really, really important. I think it's so common to make assumptions around someone, around disability inclusion. But we want to actually bring those people to be part of the team. It's actually the easiest way. You don't have to, like, it's actually the easiest way to make disability inclusion happen is to have disabled voices, and that way, like, naturally, just by practice, just by like the daily interaction and practice of work, you create inclusivity because you have to. Um, I also want to tell like disabled people to not be afraid, not disabled people or not, like, access needs are access needs. We all deserve to be able to do the best work possible. And if some of that requires some accommodations, and it's okay to ask for it. And it's a conversation. If your employer is new to this accommodation thing, take a moment to just connect and see what can be done. Likely that employer also needs accommodations in some way, shape, or form. We all do.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and that's what's so important about what you're doing, Marisa, in terms of your group, your dancers, and the speaking that you do, is to sort of start creating the conversation that you're talking about. It's like sometimes you need an outside perspective to come into your company. You need to see something beautiful and artistic to open people's eyes, and then kind of just spark the conversation. So, I mean, Marisa is an incredible speaker, and our dancers, I mean, they do amazing work, and they go into companies to do just this, and I think those are some ways that companies really, really, really can start a conversation that's not easy. It's not easy for
not
people.
easy. Yeah, and I tend to be, as a speaker, as a performing artist, I tend to be a bridge. I tend to be a bridge between those who are very new at the concept of inclusivity, whether it's around disability or not, and to now consciously be, okay, I want to be an inclusive leader. Like, I want to be part of the change. Like, I'm the bridge maker. I'm the bridge maker. There are tons of people that can now also, I don't say tons, but there are many great experts around now how to create that. It's what I call accessibility 101, inclusion 101, and definitely I want to give these experts the space to actually go in and do the tangible ABCD. But I'm like the bridge. We all, we have to always start with our hearts. Our hearts have to be in the right place for anything to move. You can't start from checking boxes. Like, I think one thing that in the very, very beginning of the pandemic, where I went from being like doing a lot of performing things to then suddenly being in this virtual space where I became a little more of a consultant and speaker and thought leader. One of the first things that someone asked me is, could I get a checklist, to make my business inclusive? And I said, and I was very uncomfortable being asked that, and the reason why is it's like, well, a checklist, like, I don't know. Is that it? No, it's like, it's not just because you've checked all the boxes of some list doesn't mean that that's it. That's all, And I think so. I think before we go into lists, and yes, lists are important. I can't say that lists are not important, but before we go into a checklist, we want to place our hearts and our minds and our souls in the right place, So, yeah. And then once you're like, okay, I am there, like my heart is there, then everything else will fall in its place a lot more smoothly. And there won't be like this gap between intention and impact, which will happen. A lot of conflict happens where intention and impact don't match because the hearts were never in the right place to start with.
Right. I mean, so powerful, so powerful, Marisa. Thank you. I know I feel like I've learned something today. I hope if you've been listening that you have some more awareness. Marisa, also, you share a lot of content around this. Best way for people to keep in touch with you on LinkedIn, on your website. You're also on Instagram. Anywhere else, anything that people want to reach out? Is it best to do that on LinkedIn, Instagram?
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn right now, so definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I do have a monthly newsletter now. I finally launched, so you can find that on my website. And yes, and I'm also newly creating content on YouTube, so definitely find me on there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with me today, for teaching me a little bit. I have so much more to learn. If you have any questions, please write them in. Please reach out to Marisa. Keep up the work that you are doing, Marisa. We need you. We need you to help lead the way. So grateful to have you. And we'll see you back next month for the next live. Really appreciate you hanging with us today. Hope you have a great rest of your month.
And thank you so much, Rachel, for creating space for me to just share a little bit about myself. And that's definitely a big part of allyship, is to be able to kind of create space for more voices. So thank you.
Of course. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon.